So here we are with the Photoshop workspace. If you're working on a PC, it might look a little bit different than this, um, but for all intents and purposes, um, when you're in Photoshop, it should have the same menu bar up here. It'll have the same options bar. It'll have the same workspace in here. Your panels over here, so where you see properties or brushes or brush presets or 3D and layers and channels and paths, those are panels. Those might be a little bit different depending on if you've worked with Photoshop or not. And then we'll have our tools over here on the left-hand side. So I'm just going to quickly use some of these shortcuts here, or some of these tools with their shortcuts. So the very first one here, move. How do we move pixels around or move selections or layers? The shortcut for that is V in move. The one right below it is the marquee tool. This is M. So M is not the shortcut for move, that's V, but M is the shortcut for marquee. We've got a couple different marquee tools nested in here. So we know that if we look and see this little triangle in the bottom right corner, that means that there are multiple tools in there. So M for marquee. What that does is it ensures that the only pixels that are active are the ones inside those marching ants. These are the only pixels active. So if I hit B for brush and start painting, let me make sure I'm on the right color. So I'm going to hit X to swap my foreground and background colors. So I'm painting here, but these pixels aren't active until I cross over that set of marching ants. So it can be really helpful for just working in one specific area. So once again, M for marquee. To get rid of these marching ants, you can just hit Command D to deselect. Command D. And then if I hit brush again, it works just fine. This is where I'm going to hit Command Z to go back in time a few steps. So that's another shortcut for you. We've got another selection tool, and that's the lasso tool. So freehand, a polygonal lasso, which is just straight lines. And here at the bottom is the magnetic lasso. I'm not sure why that's not nested in here. Let me actually go up here and go back to essentials. Good. So then when I go through the lasso, I've got all three lassos here. And it's just a different way of making a selection. Underneath that, I've got another selection tool. This is the magic wand, and the shortcut for that is W for wand. Also included in this is an object selection, which is fairly new, and the quick selection, where it's almost like a paintbrush. and you can just paint, and instead of painting a color, you're basically painting with those marching ants. The crop tool is next. At the top of the window here, right underneath the menu bar, we see this options bar. For years and years, there was always a check mark here for delete cropped pixels. They might have changed it recently, but just in case they haven't, I always uncheck that. That lets me go back if I think I might have made a mistake with my crop, and the pixels are still there. They're just not visible until you kind of activate the crop tool. So I never want to throw anything out if I can help it. This next one is fairly new, the frame tool. So it's just a placeholder for dropping new images in. The one underneath that is the eyedropper. So I for eyedropper, and that lets you select not just colors inside of Photoshop, but if you hold down a couple other keys, you can actually select colors from outside Photoshop. So if you're on like a website and you want to grab that color that they're using on it, you can drag the eyedropper tool from Photoshop into Chrome or Firefox or Safari, whatever web browser you're using. So that's the eyedropper. The healing brush tool, which goes along with the patch, and a couple other tools that sort of are remedies for issues in your photographs. If there's a smudge on there, or if there is a dust spot, or someone has red eye, you can hit J for those tools, J. The easiest way to remember that with the healing brush is if you think about who heals, and some people might say Jesus heals, so J for the healing brush. That is, that's the only way I can really remember it. Underneath that is the brush tool, just the regular paint brush, but it comes with some other really nice features that can make the paintbrush behave like a real paintbrush when you're mixing colors or working with wet and dry media. Underneath that is the stamp tool. So the stamp tool lets you copy something from one portion of your workspace to another. The stamp tool is predominantly used in retouching photographs. So you could fix dust spots on the sky, or in the background or foreground. You would just clone those elements. Underneath that is the history brush, something that I really rarely use. So maybe I can get out of my comfort zone, or you guys can get out of your comfort zones and experiment with how and when to use the history brush. It's also nice that whenever you hover over any of these tools, it'll give you a quick little like GIF or animation for that. So underneath the history brush is the eraser, always important. And so yep, we've got the eraser here. If I unlock this background layer just by double clicking on that lock, and then I go in with the eraser, Remember back to our preferences video, I had set transparency to be this red and white checkerboard pattern. So what that's telling me is that wherever you see that checkerboard, there are no pixels there. So if I print on white paper, there won't be any ink there. It'll just be the color of the paper. Underneath that are two of my favorite tools, the gradient and the paint bucket. So G for paint bucket or gradient. The smudge tool underneath that doesn't even have a shortcut, but there are a couple tools nested in there. So blur, sharpen, and smudge. Smudge can be nice, once again, to kind of replicate some of those analog processes with drawing, maybe pastels or colored pencils. So underneath that is the, not just the sponge tool, but if you've taken black and white darkroom, these are two methods of working in the darkroom, using dodging and burning to either brighten or darken areas of an image. So really Photoshop borrowing from hands-on photo editing in the darkroom. And the shortcut for that is O. Underneath that is the pen tool, so P for pen. The pen tool can be a little complicated because it works with tangents. It's mathematically based. So I'm not just going here and I'm not just going there and freehand drawing like what we normally do with a pen, but this allows for, it lets you work with vector images in Photoshop, and you're actually going to watch a YouTube video on vector images and the difference between vector and raster graphics. Underneath that is the type tool. So T for type. We're going to spend quite a bit of time working with type in the class and different ways of working with type. Let me just make that black so we can see it. We can also attach type to a path, or we can fill those paths in with type, like right here. So T for type, then we have A for our selection tool. You would work with the selection tool, usually with vector shapes, or even with text. You can convert text into a shape and then play around with the form of it. And then below that, we actually do have shapes. So U for those custom shapes. Underneath that, we have the hand tool. There are actually two shortcuts for the hand. H for hand, but my favorite is actually just holding down the space bar. So let me zoom in here. So if I wanted to be slow, I would just drag my mouse over here and click on the hand. Otherwise, if I'm on another tool, I could just hit H for hand, and then we've got the hand tool. But my My favorite thing for the hand tool, like I said, is just holding down the space bar. So I've got my brush tool here. I hold down the space bar, it turns into a hand. And as soon as I let go of the space bar, it goes right back to the brush. So any of these tools, you can just click on them, or you can use the shortcut. And in the case of the hand, there are the two shortcuts. And using the space bar is infinitely better than just hitting H and having to go back and forth between all of these tools. Now here, if we look at the bottom left corner, we see that I'm zoomed in at 300%. To zoom back out, I can just hit Command minus or Command plus to zoom in. If I wanted to fill the screen, I can hit Command 0. And if I want it to be at 100%, I can hit Command 1. So those are a couple other little shortcuts we have in there. So review these tools. We'll be using 90% of them throughout the course of this 8-week term, and hopefully after you've left this class. But that's just a really kind of quick, brief introduction to the tools panel.